All right, sorry about that. Yep, so I'm Alex Brace. Thanks everyone for inviting me, Kyle especially, and thanks for allowing me to go first. So I'm actually a grad student here at University of Chicago. I work in Ian's group, and I work with a staff scientist at Argonne National Lab, Arvind Ramanathan. So I'll be presenting on a joint work with Shantanu Jha at Brookhaven and Rutgers. This is one of the bio applications for workflows, and this originally started as a celery project. We then moved to radical ENTK. We've seen a balsam implementation, and I'll be presenting on a parcel implementation that was most recently done. So just to start with some science motivation, we're really interested in studying complex biological systems, and these have various multitudes of importance for society. So the first one would be protein folding. This essentially determines how an amino acid sequence forms into a three-dimensional structure, and that structure is responsible for all kinds of biological processes in your body and cells. We also look at protein ligand complexes, which is essentially how a drug binds to a protein. And so if you're doing drug design, this is the primary concern. And we're also interested in these many-atom multi-scale systems, which are large, think full virus simulations. And these give us insights into how, for instance, SARS-CoV-2 infects a human cell. So we do this process. We study these, phenomenon through molecular dynamics. And you can sort of imagine this as a computational microscope. So many of these phenomena you can't actually see or observe with a real microscope because you disturb the system too much. So we use physical equations, essentially Newton's laws of motion, to advance each atom of the system forward in time along some potential energy gradient. And so, of course, these are, these types of workloads represent traditional HPC workloads. And the current paradigm, or the traditional paradigm, has been, setting up this large simulation, doing all your physics, submitting the job to a job scheduler, running the simulation or multiple simulations, writing to data storage, and then doing your analysis sort of after the simulation is finished, doing visualization, interpreting the physics. But what we'd like to do is propose this way to sort of connect simulations directly to analytics, and then bypass the disk because there's sort of an information bottleneck there. And this essentially enables this sort of in situ data analysis. And you can actually use the analytics to steer further simulations and observe phenomena that you otherwise wouldn't see with just the traditional techniques because they're too slow to sample the events. And of course, I should mention this is especially as we move to increasingly larger systems, this is sort of the only viable way forward. So the way we do this is by running what we call an ensemble of simulations. This is many simulations starting with different initial velocities, samples a wide range of physics. And we start these simulations, and then we stream or just send contact maps, coordinates, atomic coordinates, and other features of the simulation that represent the states to artificial intelligence and deep learning methods, which are essentially responsible for building what we call physically interpretable embeddings. This is a numeric representation of the state of the simulation. And that allows us to actually track the statistics of the states being sampled. And then what we can do is we can say, what are the interesting states statistically? And we can actually start more simulations with those interesting states. And we can pause the ones or stop the ones that are basically being statistically uninteresting. And this is how we sort of observe these important biophysical events that would otherwise be intractable. So the way we do this, of course, is with a workflow. You can imagine you're running, say, hundreds of simulations in parallel. These are all embarrassingly parallel. And you have some way that you need to communicate the data being produced to machine learning methods for one, training. And two, once you have the trained model, you'd like to run inference to do the outlier detection, other biophysical analysis to say what is interesting. And so we've implemented this in this most recent version with Colmena, which is essentially an orchestration package that leverages a lot of middleware such as Parcel and other workflow managers. They formulate it as a task server. So you submit each simulation task or training task to the server, then gets routed to the correct computing resource using the Parcel infrastructure in this case. And you sort of have this thinker application, which in our case runs on the login node. And it communicates which jobs should be run when and submits those to the appropriate queue. And you can see the sort of data flow loop where it's sort of looping around. You have your physics engine, it's streaming data or writing data to disk, which is then read by the training task periodically. Once the models are trained, the weights are written, those weights are read in for the inference task, and then the inference then feeds the next set of simulations. And these are all coordinated through that Colmena thinker process. And of course, this is driving some optimization objective for the sampled states, trying to sample the biophysical events, or simply runtime constraints or wall time. Currently, the communication is just each component writes to disk. I need to talk with Greg and others about how to adapt proxy store to actually efficiently serialize the domain-specific information coming from the simulations. So, how do we efficiently serialize large simulations?
就开这种会啊。
Oh, sorry. Can someone mute, please? Thanks. And yeah, so for the purpose of the infrastructure, what we've done is actually implemented some abstract layer over the particular communication, so you could actually communicate with arbitrary protocols, arbitrary file formats, and using proxy store in that way. So if you can put this workflow together, what can you do? You can essentially, as compared to a purpose-built supercomputer called the Anton machine, you can essentially simulate events about 1,000 to 100 times faster using this sort of parallel workflow using the AI-driven steering. And we just track the number of states using the machine learning methods that we're building. We say what's the percentage of states being sampled in our simulations compared to the more traditional simulations, and we see we're getting a much better sampling ratio. As far as the software is concerned, so I just had 2 slides on the software layers. So what we did, we found this particularly useful because we have a wide array of use cases we like to support. The drug docking, the protein folding, and other use cases. So we actually have an abstract layer over which particular simulation engines you're using. Different engines are suited to different tasks, as well as the particular models you're training. So you could use variational autoencoders, standard autoencoders. We have other methods. You could use a transformer. Which type of inference you're running, what biophysical detection algorithms would you like to use to augment the AI? And so all these decisions is sort of at the science layer. And so we've decoupled the software from those considerations. As far as the parcel is concerned, what we found most useful is actually implementing a Pydantic layer over it. And this allows you to configure the type of compute resource you're using directly from YAML. So a scientist doesn't have to worry about parcel configurations. They simply use pre-canned versions that are automatically detected as far as if you want to run on a standard workstation or a supercomputer, and different variations of supercomputers with different schedulers. So we found that to be a really useful trick to convert the YAML directly to the parcel configuration. And lastly, I'd just like to thank Logan Ward for Colmena support and Kyle Chard for helping support several projects with Parcel as far as deep driving the use cases. And this work, of course, wouldn't be possible without all the funding from Exascale Compute and DOE. So thank you.
Got 3 minutes for questions. Someone in the Zoom chat, if you're on Zoom and have a question. And then, yeah.
100 to 1,000 times speed up. Is that coming from task parallelism that you're able to throw off more tasks, or is it because you're truncating simulations when you see that they're not being fruitful and then you're getting through them faster?
That's essentially it. It's coming from the AI specifically selecting which simulations are sampling interesting events and stumping the ones that aren't. So it's actually an algorithmic speed up that's supported by the parallelism.
Right. And do you also get any speed up that you count from carving off sections by saying, I went this far, these aren't working, so nothing past that works, and then you count those states as having been visited?
Yeah, that's essentially what the algorithm does implicitly. Exactly.